And it's I, Wacky Anime What If, here to present you with What If Issei was betrayed and snapped his limiter. I hope you all enjoy, and if you do, please get into your car and run over that like button as many times as possible. Let's go ahead and get right into this. Issei has just woken up. He's really not feeling well. Right when he got out of the bed, he felt like his day was going to be very, very wrong. Actually, it feels like a danger sense is kind of kicking in, telling him to get out of his house as quickly as possible. And Issei was about to react to that. He quickly got on his outfit for Kohai to go to Kohai. As soon as he got it on and was about to run out the door, a magic portal was in front of his doorway. And it had the Grimory household symbol on it. So Issei thought it must be Rias or someone else, either to take him to school or just to talk to him about something urgent. But as soon as the figures appeared out of the magic circle, he was tackled by two guards, and Graphia, the Grimory housemaid, looked at Issei and said that he was going to be put on trial. Issei was confused. He ended up shouting out saying, "Trial for what exactly?" And she looked at him and scowled and didn't tell him exactly what he was being put on trial for. Issei didn't really know what was happening at all. The guards didn't tell him either. They merely tightened their grip and held him down, while putting on magic nullifying cuffs on him, so he wouldn't use any magic or any sort of supernatural ability to get out. So Issei was dragged into the magic circle, and he's now in the Grimory Resonance, specifically the dungeon in the Grimory Resonance, where there's mold all around. He's chained to the wall and can't move at all. There's mold slowly creeping in everywhere. There's mildew dropping on his head, and contaminated water filled halfway into the cell he's in. He's halfway submerged with the water, and Akeno is walking down the steps towards where Rias is. Well, towards where Issei is. While Rias is merely observing from the magic security camera that was installed in the cell. As soon as Akeno went into Issei's cell and saw it was submerged in halfway in water, she just looked at Issei and smiled a devilish smile, and said, "You know, it was quite exhausting acting like I actually liked you." And Issei looked at her and his mouth opened a little. Well, enough for some of the mildew to go in his mouth, which was quite disgusting, and he ended up coughing out. And she said, "Oh, you didn't know I didn't actually like you. None of us actually did. We only invited you because you had the Red Dragon, because you're the Red Dragon Emperor. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. You're quite hopeless, you're perverted, you're the nerdy type, you don't have any muscle on you, there's no specific aura about you without the Red Dragon Emperor, and you're weaker than most humans are. So, in all due respect, you kind of sucked. Which is why this is happening to you, because you're weak," is what Akeno said, while Issei, after recovering from mildew falling into his mouth and some contaminated water, ended up screaming out that he trusted them, while she merely laughs and said, "Well, that's your fault, isn't it?" And she starts to emit electricity out of her hand, and she touches the water. And once she touches the water, Issei, who's halfway submerged in it, starts to feel electricity jolting throughout his entire body. He starts to fry. His insides start to feel like they're getting cooked. He starts vomiting out blood, which as soon as the blood comes out and lands on his chest, it starts to sting. The blood is at such a hot temperature to where it can melt into your skin. Or more specifically, to where it can burn your skin, which his own blood was starting to burn out of his skin. All the reason why Issei was okay was because of Drake's regenerative factor. Akeno continued frying him for around 7 hours before stopping. Issei's regeneration factor with Drake was just about to hit its limit. And, well, Issei has already been hit his limit of his mental sanity. Throughout the entire pain, he had to dull or completely shut off his pain sensors to survive. That's what his body was telling him to do, which it acted on it. So Issei currently cannot feel any pain, so after about 6 hours, he stopped feeling it. So, yeah, Issei's checked out right now. He's currently unconscious. And the water is being drained out of the room. Ria starts to enter the room where Akeno is at, where she's been torturing Issei for around 7 hours. Once she enters, she asks Akeno if they succeeded. And Akeno immediately responds, no, it seems that to remove the Red Dragon Emperor from Issei, we have to do more drastic things. And Rias merely says, whatever you need to do, do it. And Akeno merely smiles devilishly. She asks for a certain amount of tools. The next morning, when Issei finally wakes up again, he notices he's not in his cell anymore, while the cell that he was in previously. Instead, he's trapped on a table, and he has these cuffs around him, preventing him from leaving. And he ends up noticing that there's a lot of spotlights on him. He can't really see anything, except he sees a figure above him now. Just the shadow outline. And the person has a saw, it seems. And once he sees the saw, he starts freaking out and panicking. He tries to move his legs and his limbs, but they're being held down by the chains. Well, by the cuffs, to be exact. And Issei cannot move at all, no matter how much he wants to. And he notices that the saw is getting closer towards his hand, the one where Drake is on. And the figure just menacingly puts his hand upwards with the saw and hacks it directly towards Issei's wrist and starts sawing into it. He could hear his flesh being, well, ripped into by the saw. It going back and forth. He could hear the slimy sounds. He could hear the dreadful, dreadful squelch of his hand when the blood started spraying, and Issei was forced to open his eyes to look. Because when he tried to close his eyes, an unknown figure grabbed both of his eyelids and forced them open, making him witness his arm being cut off. And his pain sensors were back on. So he was feeling every second of this. They didn't make it happen exactly fast either. It was a slow, agonizing process of around 9 hours, which he was being healed by Drake regardless. So them chopping off the arm like that didn't do anything. And they knew it. They just wanted him to feel some pain. Because they knew that the ultimate way to get Drake off of him would be to chop it off in one fell swoop. But they did it slow and agonizing on purpose. So after all the hours, Rias ended up barging into the room and saying that this was taking too long, why don't we just cut it off in one swoop? Which it took her that long to find out. She could just merely do that. While Issei is looking at her, with tears in his eyes, and the lights are completely turned off so he can see all the figures. The one that was hacking into Issei's arm was Kiba. The one that was holding his eyelids open was Akeno. And the one that attached the chains and the cuffs were Konako. He could tell because she was in the corner of the room, and she had the button towards the cuffs to unlock and lock them. Which he presumed because of how they're made. And he's seen these on certain prisoners that entered the Grimmery estate. Issei merely had tears in his eyes and an angry face, looking at Rias. Rias merely looked at Issei and scowled, before walking towards him, grabbing him by the neck and choking the literal life out of him, while saying, "You don't dare look at me like that, you little shit," and punching him in the face as violently as possible. And because of her superior strength as being a very high-ranking devil, she was able to knock him unconscious, and the fact that he was already about to fall unconscious because of the pain. When he was unconscious, he woke back up a few hours later, back into his cell. And he was furious. The chains were still on him, and he realized what happened. He was set up, and they want to get Drake away from him, so they can use the power for their own. Issei decided if he was going to get out of here, he needed to work quickly. He looked at his chains. He didn't see a single way to get out of the chains, but he looked around the room and saw that there was a lot of cracks in the wall. If he had enough strength, he could just punch the wall, and it'd probably break, because of how fragile it is. But he doesn't, as he tries to kick it with his left leg. Tries to kick the wall beside him, the one with cracks. It doesn't break or even budge. But he always sees Konako punch holes in walls very easily, but he can't do the same. This is quite literal bullshit, is what he's thinking. As he continuously kicks it for hours and hours, until his entire feet are bloody, and his toes are completely dislocated or broken, from his constant kicks barefooted into the wall beside him, trying to escape. His efforts are in vain, and he knows it. So he decides before whatever happens, he'll decide to exercise. Even though the cuffs are on, he can still leave the room now because they were adjusted. The cuffs can only reach around the halfway towards the exit of his cell. So he decides to do push-ups. He does push-ups for a few hours. He does 100 push-ups, and it's very straining on him, because he's never really done push-ups in his life. Never done sit-ups, or anything like that. He was quite literally weaker than the average human when he was a human, because he had a heart disease, apparently. They didn't know this, but he had a major heart disease that afflicted him, which he really kept to himself, but they found out anyway. The heart disease makes it to where if he has too much influx of emotions, then his physical body cannot keep up with it. And if he does too much physical activity, then he can possibly die or vomit up blood. So Issei doing these push-ups was basically saying he's going to probably die. But his increased double strength was helping him. He did 100 push-ups and continuously started going more. But as soon as he was at the 101 push-up limit, he started vomiting up blood. But this Issei did not really care anymore. He continuously kept on doing it. His muscles felt like they were aching or trying to rip apart. So Issei continuously did it more and more. Drake came out of his hand and told him to stop, that this was useless, and that you should find a different way, partner. But Issei didn't listen. Issei merely said, if I can get stronger, I could probably punch a hole in that wall. All the cracks that are in it would be easy. Even if Konako were to flick it, it'd probably go down. So the fact that I can't do it, even though I'm supposedly a devil, and I have you, is quite literally embarrassing. Don't you agree? While Drake merely says yes. Issei continuously does the push-ups each and every day. It's already been around 2 months since he's been held captive. Issei has pushed himself through extensive amount of training in push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, and pull-ups with his chains, pulling himself upwards. He's done this over and over. First it started off as 100, then it started off at 150, and up until the 2 months limit, he's now doing up to 5,000 on each one of them. He's doing 5,000 sit-ups, push-ups, jumping jacks, and pull-ups. But he always ends up coughing up blood, but he just ignores it more. He still hasn't been able to punch the hole in the wall, but he's getting closer and closer towards it. The walls were cracking slightly more and more every time he punched into it. It looked like he was about to fall apart today. So after he got done with his daily routine of his push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, he punched the wall again, just like he's done every 2 months, like every single day for 2 months. And once he punched it, it finally fell down. And Issei was just cheering, and he jumped as high as he could, while not trying to say anything, because if he screamed out, yeah, all of a sudden everyone's going to come in like the Kool-Aid Man and start fucking his ass up. And Issei already knew this, so he decided not to do that. But once Issei looked back at the wall, he noticed that Rias was sitting in a chair, Akino was sitting next to her, Kiba was sitting next to them, and Big Bad Sir Zex himself was sitting right behind them. And all of them started clapping, saying, "You did it, you useless fucking failure. Now we can have a proper reason to execute you. Because you tried to escape." We didn't have one before that could convince anyone, but since you tried to escape a prison, then now we can execute you, because we have valid reason. So congrats, you just signed your death warrant, is what they all say while they're clapping, and having the most sinister grins on their faces. And this makes Issei want to punch their heads off. So Issei charges at them with as much speed and power as he can, but then he forgets one thing. They're out of his distance because the chains pull him backwards. He falls on the ground right on his ass, and they all just look at him and laugh more, walking closer, kicking him to the ground, and all of them start big booting him. They all start stepping on him, kicking him, punching him, bruising him, fracturing his bones, and even straight up grabbing him by the neck and choke slamming him against the wall, and basically spreading his face against the wall while running across it, over and over, for a few hours, before they finally throw him into a cell, and then walk out of it, to file the paperwork for his execution. Issei is currently in a cell crying, and very much raged that all of his friends betrayed him, and the people who he thought could potentially be friends also did. And so did Sir Zex, who he viewed as a brother figure. Issei doesn't know what else to do, so he decides to keep on doing his exercise he's been doing. He does 5,000 push-ups, but then he decides to go even higher than that. He does it until he completely drops. He does over 5,000, he does 10,000, but he just doesn't stop there. Even though he's coughing out blood, his bones were completely broken or dislocated, he continuously did them even in that state. He kept on pushing it more and more. Drake was warning him that Drake's regeneration would stop after a while. That it's going to kill him if he continues doing more. But Issei didn't listen. He continually did more push-ups, until he reached up to 50,000, and his body was collapsing. Drake's regeneration had stopped already, because it's been 7 hours since he started doing them. And once he's reached the 50,000, and his body was collapsing, he kept on doing more. He kept on doing more and more, until he reached up to 100,000. His body was completely bloodied, and he was bleeding from every single part of his body, because of all of his previous wounds, and because he's opening them again, and the regeneration had stopped. So Issei is now starting to fade to black. His eyes are starting to close, but he still doesn't give up on those push-ups. He continuously does more and more. Even though he's about to literally die, he continuously does them. Until he feels like something snapped inside. And he feels very energetic now. He gets up, and he puts his hand behind his head, because he feels a little itchy on the back of his head. Once he does, he scratches the back of his head, and the itch is gone. He pulls his hand right in front of him, and then he hears a loud snap sound. He looks behind him to see that the chain that was holding him for 2 whole months has now broken. And Issei is literally overjoyed. So he puts his hands up in the air and starts to cheer a little bit. And he notices as soon as he puts his other hand up that the other chain snapped. And now he knows he's free. So he just runs towards the wall that was broken previously that they didn't even think about fixing. Because, well, he's still attached to those chains, and those chains are 10 times harder than that wall was to break down. So they didn't think about those snapping. So Issei just immediately ran out of the hole in the wall, like the Kool-Aid Man, and started running the fuck away. He saw a guard who was in front of the hole, and he silently crouched down and started walking up towards them from behind and chopped him in the neck. And that didn't really do anything, is what he was thinking, because he was like, hold up, they do this in assassin games. I'm not an assassin, and this is my first time trying to do this, so of course it probably didn't work. But he looks down and he sees the guy fell down to the ground and has a face imprint on the ground. He just grabs the guy by the back of the collar, pulls him up, and notices that his face is now gone. His face was attached to the concrete to the ground. And as soon as he pulled it upwards, his face was ripped off. And Issei just merely says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I did not mean to do that." And he just takes off his clothes and grabs the guard's clothes and puts them on. And he just walks out, removes the cuffs, and no one really knows the difference between him or the guard. Because the guard always had a hat over his head. Most of them did. And some of them tend to pull it downwards because either they were too unsightly to the Grimmery family, because whenever someone was hideous or looked ugly to them, they always told them to put on a hat and to always keep it down whenever they looked at them. And not to look them in the eyes because they were commoners or because they were low-ranking devils. So when Issei put on the hat, he pulled it downwards so that no one recognized him, and it was completely normal. And Issei started to walk out of the facility of the Grimmery estate before he heard a loud alarm blare, and heard a voice over the intercom say, "Everyone, state code red. A prisoner has escaped. The prisoner's name is Issei Hyodo. We do not know how he escaped, but there may be multiple accomplices. All guards, be on alert. Anyone that is wearing a guard suit from Unit 1, please report to admin office." And Issei looked at the suit, the actual outfit he was on, and he saw that there was Unit 1 written on it. And he immediately says, "Shit," before he looks behind him and sees this one person with a gun aiming at all the lower ranked devils. And this gun was a sacred gear. He aimed at all of them and said, "All of you line up in a circle and follow me." They tell them to line up in a circle because if you're in a line, if you're in the back, you could easily escape. But if you're in a circle, they can see all of you in clear view, is the reason why they did this. So everyone had to line up in a circle. Issei was about to try to bolt for it, but he noticed the gun was pointing towards him, so he had to get into a circle. So he walked into the middle of the circle, and he placed himself on the side, the right side of the circle, beside two other people. The man directed them all to admin office, and once he went to the admin office, he saw one person in particular. He looked up and he saw Grafia, and she merely said, "Everyone take off your hats. I need to see your face." And right when Grafia said this, Issei's heart dropped a little, because if he takes off his hat, they'll know it's him and he'll be executed immediately. He's got to think of something, anything. And before he could think of anything, the guy who's telling you this entire what if decides to stop the video here. And I hope you guys enjoyed.